you know how it is. You're 6 days into a beautifully relaxing family beach holiday in Cornwall when Google makes a pretty massive announcement.
New Google Helpful Content Update to change SEO, much like Panda did. Google to launch Helpful Content Updates to diversify search results. SEOs may be in for another shake-up since Pens launched 10 years ago.
And they used pretty much every media-linked SEO to push out stories and information about the update. Now, it's fair to say that Google made a pretty big thing about this, and that's why we saw these dramatic headlines in SEO publications, and actually it had some SEOs running for cover. And while some made no changes and used their experience to understand that these things happen, others were deleting content and trying to optimize their sites prior to the rollout, even though Google had already said that they'd already done the initial data crawl. Now, whether you think you've been hit by the update, or maybe if you think you've improved or your sites have improved as a result of it, I'm going to tell you today what the helpful content update means for me and the changes, if any, that I will be making going forwards to try and make sure that my sites benefit from this update rather than suffer from them. So let's take a look. Now, the first thing to say is that the impact of the helpful content update so far has been fairly minimal, but Google's Danny Sullivan did have this to say.
Maybe the helpful content signal alone wasn't enough to tip the scales and produce a change in someone's particular situation. But when we do other updates, core product reviews, it might add into that and be more significant.
Sorry, I'm sure Danny doesn't really speak like that. But the point here is that clearly this is the direction that Google are pushing towards, and so we do need to take note of it. Whether it's impacted your site or not, you would be foolish to ignore it. And of course, like Danny said there is a product review update due in the next week or two, and this is the helpful content update is something that's ever present. It's going to be there, and it potentially is going to become a bigger signal over time. Defining helpful content is not easy. The clue is kind of in the title, but it's still pretty vague, isn't it? So my main tip here around creating helpful content is to try and satisfy the search intent of that particular query. Now, there's been a lot of talk about word counts, and people also ask questions and things like that. But again, my advice here is to use a common sense approach combined with page one research. If Google is rewarding a site that's on page one for a particular term, then it makes sense to go for something similar to what they're doing. That doesn't mean copy their content, but it does mean if all the sites on page one have 3,000 words of content, for example, then you're probably not going to rank with the 200-word answer. So, for example, if you're trying to rank for a question such as how many eyes does a horse have, if you know, you know, then it probably doesn't need a 2,000-word answer to get that featured snippet or to rank on page one. At the very least, you'd like to think it would at least be an accurate answer. Now, my third tip is to write for your audience and your future audience. Now, what do I mean by that? Obviously, it talks about writing for real people rather than writing for search engines. And your particular audience, or the audience that you are trying to attract to your blog, is going to be very specific to your niche and probably even more specific to your particular site. So write with that user in mind. When I started a YouTube channel, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I had was to create an avatar, which essentially was creating a persona to talk to. So I always have an idea as to who my perfect audience is. Now, I think this is advice that could definitely apply to niche site writers. So think about who you want your audience to be, or if you know who they are, then even better, and write specifically for them. My next piece of advice works really well for informational and for affiliate type queries. So whether you're writing a review or whether you're answering a question, this works really well, and it is to give snapshot answers or verdicts towards the top of the content. Now this is something that I've been doing a fair bit on my informational posts, and if you've been following my case study age domain site, then you would have seen this where I give an answer or a quick verdict towards the top of the content. And this has become even more important off the back of the helpful content update, where Google has said that it wants to satisfy that user intent as quickly and as succinctly as possible. And I am paraphrasing there, so I apologise for that. But essentially, we need to give the user the answer in a format that makes sense and with enough information so that they don't then head back to Google. For example, if you're an affiliate site and you give them a quick verdict, essentially what you really want to do there is to get them to click, go through, make the purchase, not go back to Google, and that's a perfect situation. Next up, it's really important that you still continue to do the basics of SEO. Google have not come out and said that you shouldn't be practicing best practices from an SEO point of view. They're purely saying that they don't want to reward sites that are purely writing for search engines. So you still need to use those ranking signals that we know are there. So your page title, your URL, your H1 and H2 tags, your meta title, and maybe your meta description, and of course the content itself still needs to be SEO optimized. Now it might be that the thresholds for over optimization have diminished a little bit, so you do need to be careful and not go too far the other way. But like I say, it's still really important that you do make use of those ranking factors. Everything we've discussed so far is all well and good, but if you're making these mistakes that kill affiliate websites, then the best content in the world is not going to help. So to ensure your affiliate site doesn't die before it's lived, check the video out and make sure that you are not making those mistakes. Guys, thanks very much for watching and good luck with your projects.